Alright, this video, is an extension of the My Life series. I want to expand on what I mean by culture. Um, so in the other, series when I was talking about my life as far as culture is concerned, I felt that, at an early age, even at the age of 5, or, in grade school, when I was like, maybe in first grade or something, moving here to the or basically being born in the United States, but I'm in between two different cultures. I have the Chinese culture, and then there's the American culture. And being able to balance both out is very difficult, especially as a child. So what ended up happening was, as a little child, I started denying my own culture, trying to fit in with the people around me. So what happened was, people would say things about me, for being different or looking different, and that what ended up happening is I ended up denying my own culture. So I kind of stopped learning the language, stopped speaking the language because I was ashamed, just because I, other people around me made me feel that it was inferior to, the English language. So I started speaking English and everything. But culture to me goes beyond just the language. It's just a whole um, different way of living, as far as, like, you got Chinese, for example. They have their own culture, you know the way, they have their own philosophies, their own religion. The way that they view life is very different than, American culture. It's not, they might, they look different. Chinese people look different. you know their facial features, and, their height and everything. What they eat is different. That's part of the culture. Chinese food, for example. And the way of living is very different. I mean, now, if you go to China, if you study China, it's assimilating to become more Western. So you might not see it now, the major differences, because they become more modernized, more technology and everything, where they're becoming more Westernized. But as far as the ancient culture is concerned, you know, when you see the style of dress, for example, is different. The way of living is different. The speaking, the language is different. The writing is extremely different. I mean, you look at Chinese characters, for example, extremely different than the English language. So, I mean, there's major differences. And for me, someone like me, I'm caught in between. Even though I was born here, my parents were not born here. They were born in Hong Kong. So they took along their culture, their language into this country. And here I have my family, which is one culture, and then I go to school and it's another culture. So as a young child, it's hard, you know, to integrate both. So I ended up having to choose one over the other. And throughout my entire life, I've always dealt with that struggle of denying my original culture of what I was born with. And it wasn't until I started practicing martial arts did I start to appreciate my own culture. There's very few Asian Americans in mass media, in the movies, that are given respectable roles, that are admired by the mass public in America. There's very few. Only a few Asian Americans were able to achieve, like, respectable, famous statuses. And one of the few is Bruce Lee. But before he even realized, came about that recognition, he already died. So he wasn't even alive to be able to experience the respectable recognition that he achieved. And even after him, there's really nobody. You know, people could say Jet Li, Jackie Chan, but they've achieved fame in their own countries first, in China first. And only after they've shown that they've been able to make profit and fame in their own country were their movies brought over to America and just basically used as tools to make profit. But there was no Asian American that started off in America and achieved fame in America and recognition in America. Mostly any Asian that wants to achieve that type of fame, he'd have to go back to his own country and get the support from there. So, with that being said, there's really no Asian American role models in mass media that I see. And that makes it really difficult for Asian Americans specifically to connect with their original culture. We're always in a kind of in a clash between picking between one and the other, and many times we end up having to just assimilate fully, and meaning we just have to adapt to the American culture and become totally Americanized, where we end up denying, our original culture of which we were born with. And that's a struggle that I believe that every Asian American encounters. And that was a struggle that I was encountering. And like I said, it wasn't until I started practicing martial arts that I started to appreciate my own culture. Whereas martial arts finally is something that's seen as cool and respectable, and people, look at it and they're in awe and they respect it. And from when I started practicing martial arts, I started to even respect my own culture, my original culture, much more. I started becoming more interested in learning about where, you know, the foundation of martial arts, where it began, and how it all started. I started being close to my mother, who was very, you know, um, culturized, you know, and always in Chinatown and participating in community events over there, and just really still living within the culture, her original culture, still not fully assimilated to America. She still speaks Cantonese all the time. She has a lot of friends that are Chinese. Most majority of all her friends are Chinese, and she still is living that culture in America, which is very difficult to do. So I started growing closer to her, and being around in Chinatown more, hanging around more people of the Chinese the Chinese descent, and growing closer and learning more about the culture. So martial arts did that for me, and I started studying the philosophies of Bruce Lee, and that's when he introduced me to the mentality behind my original culture, the mental state, the ways of thinking, the way of living of my original culture, the Chinese culture, and the philosophies behind it. And that's ultimately what completely changed my life and really got me to fully accept my inner self and my original culture. Okay? I believe that I was born to be, um, to think a certain way, to be a certain way. And that has the roots, it's rooted in my original culture. And it does not just compose of just language. As you see, I'm speaking English, and that's something that I assimilated to because of my surroundings. But as far as my way of thinking, my way of life, it's something that does not necessarily have to be assimilated to. It's just like something that I could hold deep within myself and cherish, and I don't have to let anybody take that away from me. And that's what I cherish a lot about the ancient Eastern philosophy and wisdom that I've learned to connect with. And because I believe I was born, you know, Chinese, I'm able to understand it at a much deeper level than any other person that's not born Chinese. Is because I truly understand it. Somebody, these these translators, these great translators